preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome. Thank you. So nice to meet you after the many, many years that I've heard about you, as I'm sure most of you have also. I first heard the name Rebecca Goldstein when I read The Mind-Body Problem, and it bowled me over. Good. However, when we decided to have Rebecca Goldstein here, I think she felt, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the mind-body problem was kind of behind her. This book came out in 1995, so I guess it's more recent. And so, with your permission, that's what we're going to talk about. So, Mazel. Luck. Good luck, bad luck, all kinds of luck. In Rebecca Goldstein's version, it's a story about Jewish life in Poland before the Holocaust. It's a feminist tale that crosses the ocean and unfolds where else? America. It's an exploration of causality. What is random? What is determined? At its most basic, it asks the question, which is more important, Muzzle, luck, or Seykhl, brains? It opens in a fictional town of Lipton, New Jersey, a stronghold of Orthodox Judaism in America, American suburbia. And it introduces 3 generations of women. Phoebe, the mathematician who studies the geometry of soap bubbles and is awaiting the birth of her first child. Chloe, a classicist who chose as the father of her child a Gentile logician. And Sasha, the grandmother, who wears leather pants, shocking everyone in Lipton, but whose memories take her back to her shtetl birthplace, and then to pre-war Warsaw and the milieu of Yiddish theater. As the story winds through the years and shifts venues, it's interwoven with a tale of a little tailor who, through a combination of pure chance and native intelligence, marries a beautiful princess and lives happily ever after. I found that very intriguing, and I wonder if you'd like to comment on the way you interweave the story, your story, with this tale.
Okay, so let's see, the little folktale, which I didn't make up, it's an old Yiddish folktale, although I put it in my own words, but it's a tale that I think first heard from my father, who came from Poland. And it's a story about it actually asks the question, what's more important, Seykhl or Mazel, brains, or luck? So it's a folktale, an old Yiddish folktale, asking precisely the question that I was wondering about in the novel. One of the questions I was wondering about in the novel, and it argues pretty well. You've all read it, right?
You can assume that they have.
It argues pretty strongly for Mazel. Seykhl without Mazel is not going to get you far, and so it just seemed pertinent. One of the things I was trying to do in the novel, of course, was get back to that old culture, to reconnect with the Yiddish culture. So using a Yiddish folktale to express one of my themes seemed the right way to go.
So the theme, what is Muzzle? To Phoebe, battered by her obsessions, it was always a sweet thought that heaven itself might meddle in the affairs of the heart, that somewhere in the middle of the muddle lay a preordained solution. A sweet, sweet thought, even though probably in the end, to be taken with about as much seriousness as her mother's constant little prayers and paeans to the gods and goddesses of Mount Olympus. People must, of course, have learned the word beshared from her Phoebe must, of course, have learned the word beshared from her grandmother, although Sasha would only have uttered it toward the most sarcastic of ends. The word in Sasha's nostrils carried the stink of fatalism, which to her smells exactly like that little place, Schlufchef, on the puddle, where she had been born, Sorel Sonnenberg. Sasha had less than little patience for the bedtime story teleology of Beshared. Against it, she summons forth her knowledge of, what else? Muzzle, sly saboteur of cosmic coziness, subversive as the unholy laughter that was said to come from Schlufchef's study house in the dead of night when the demons took to arguing the law. It's a beautiful definition. Mathematics, of course, on the other hand, seems to be very much the opposite of what is random, and Phoebe's soap bubbles and their structure offer the perfect metaphor. The world of the shtetl that you create seems to be at the whim of Mazel. In fact, you say in the month of Adar, a Mazeldike month, a Mazeldike event took place, the betrothal of Frel, which we feel all along will end in tragedy, and of course it does, because she drowns herself. Mazel then doesn't exclude the sense of doom. Most of us think of it as a positive force, but I think you're very careful to point out that it is not. And so also the troupe of actors that Sasha belongs to turned down the opportunity to go to America on the eve of the Holocaust, despite the saying which is quoted, and I love this also, when Muzzle comes, one pulls out a chair. I'm translating from the Yiddish, but I think that's accurate. In the afterword of the new edition, I'd like to quote on page 362, and I just want to point out that you wrote this afterword quite recently, just in the past year.
Yeah, I think I have the date there. It was a few days after September 11th.
It's after September 11th. Mm-hmm.
September 30th. Yeah.
What I wanted for my purpose were mothers and daughters who were so separate from one another that each spoke a sort of language, a soul language, unintelligible to the other, so that complete, exhaustive knowledge of the one by the other was a logical impossibility. And yet, in the midst of their unknowing, these mothers and daughters would sustain a love and an intimacy that would be all that one could hope for. So you create this mathematician named Phoebe, after the sun god, Phoebus Apollo, and a professor of classics who's a specialist in the Furies named Chloe. And you seem to see your characters as representing this tension between the Apollonian and the Dionysian forces, and this is what you write. Phoebe's mother, Chloe, has no fluency in the language of mathematics, though she possesses another rather obscure language. She is a professor of classics, her specialty, the tragedies of Euripides. A shy, retiring scholar on the outside, her soul is as familiar with Dionysian darkness and fury as her daughter's is lit with Apollonian clarity. Both can only go a certain distance in grasping the other. They know this, and they live with it, accepting the untraversable distances. Enter the grandmother, Sorel, Sasha, who is in some ways, if I'm reading her correctly, a kind of combination of both, a woman who has tremendous positive energy, but who is haunted by the memories of her dead sister, her sister Frel, who, I guess, escaped the repression of the shtetl by drowning herself. And so Sasha says at one point that she wishes she could, quote, put her granddaughter under glass. So I'm wondering, in this relationship between mothers and daughters, if you see that tension also, and if that's inevitable.
You know, I don't remember the afterword all that well because I wrote it in such a daze. We were all in such a daze. So I mean, actually, I was listening with great interest to what I had written, and so I don't remember whether I shared in that piece how these characters first came to me. I'm a mother of daughters, as well as having been a daughter of a mother. My oldest daughter was, at that point, very intensely devoted to the project of separating from her mother with tremendous conscientious diligence. And I thought, well, isn't this, we had been, so glommed onto each other. It was not healthy. Of course, this is exactly what ought to be happening. And, meanwhile, it was horrible, and my heart was daily breaking. And I had been doing dishes, actually, when I was thinking, I was constantly thinking about it, obsessing about it. And there were soap bubbles, and I've always loved soap bubbles. Not only did I, devote myself to blowing soap bubbles as a child, but far beyond that. And there is, in fact, very beautiful mathematics to be gotten out of soap bubbles, which always seemed to me amazing, that you can do something precise and, math on something as fragile and ephemeral as soap bubbles. So I knew a woman at Princeton who did geometry of soap bubbles, and I always knew I was somehow going to do that. So here I was thinking about mothers and daughters, and there were some bubbles, and the image came to me that soap bubbles is the way to go, that this is a very good metaphor for what I would like my relationships with my daughters to be, that we would be sealed together, but that there would be, in this very fragile configuration, very easily pierced, that there would be a recognition that of the separation. We'd be sharing a wall, but the separation. And so I wanted 3 generations of very different women who love each other, and as I said in the afterword, that's actually what I had wanted, was they would speak somehow a different language in their souls in a way so that they really couldn't understand each other in a very dramatic way. And of course I made one of them a mathematician because, I'm obsessed with mathematicians, math, and so that was taken care of. And I wanted another, and first they were very, very fragile creatures. I mean, they were inspired by soap bubbles. And then I wanted, but somebody who was, I was thinking Apollonian and math and clarity. So I wanted a mother who spoke a language, a different kind of language in her soul, and also, a language that most people can't speak, ancient Greek, the language of Euripides, as most people can't speak math. And then I wanted somebody else, another character who would be very different from those two. First, I was going to make her a musician, but that was too close to math. And I wanted, for once in my life, to write about a character who wasn't an intellectual. I mean, that was to me a tremendous challenge to try, since I basically, live in my head. To try to create a character who didn't, who was more a person of action. And so I was just really looking around for another language. And I thought, something occurred to me, well, Yiddish. There's another one of those languages. I mean, there's math. Most people don't speak that. Most people don't speak ancient Greek. And Yiddish is a language that grandmothers often speak, and nobody else in the family can speak. I actually discovered in the course of doing the research for the book that I, in some sense, do know Yiddish from the Hebrew that I know and from the German that I know. By logical entailment, I was able to get out a little bit of Yiddish, although when my mother was alive then, when I would try to speak it to her, she would say, that's not Yiddish, that's just unconjugated German. But that's how I got Sasha. And then I wanted her, this Yiddish to be part of her professional life. So I made her a Yiddish Yiddish actress, and there she was. She was. So she is, yeah, she does share, you're right, she does share in both the darkness, but it's an act of will on her part to live in the light. She decides, she's, it's a very, very strong person, and it's really an act of will. To me, she was very courageous. She didn't give in to the darkness in her. She understands it very well, though.
But I find her, I don't know about you, but I found her frightening. Intrusive as all, and she finds her match in her future daughter, her granddaughter's future mother-in-law, Beatrice.
Right. Beatrice, right.
Who is just as much of a control freak as she is.
Yeah.
And I was wondering whether you consciously drew these characters who, it seems to me, are doing everything in their power to struggle with this concept of Muzzle, with this force that, I don't know how it might destroy Beatrice's life because she lives in this enclave in New Jersey, but struggling with the randomness. And I guess randomness implies a certain vulnerability that they can't stand.
Yeah. Well, it's true. I actually thought Sasha was reconciled to Mazel. She's forceful, and she's she's sort of a take charge person. But I felt that she actually did accept that she knew that you can't. One of the big things actually, and it all comes down to Spinoza and Plato. Actually, those are what I was thinking about. A lot of trying to live the rational life is trying to educate your desires so you're only going to care about what you can control, which is basically the progress of your own understanding. So, and Sasha, Sasha kind of, she rejects that. She understands what it would be to buy into that, but she rejects it. And I think she is actually quite, she's forceful and she's dramatic. She's very dramatic. But I think she knows about reversals of fortune very, very well. She's a survivor.
Right, her life has taught her that.
Truly a survivor. And it's an act of will. She knows what the gods can fling us.
But she's a fighter.
Yeah, she's a real fighter. Yeah. She was a lot of fun to inhabit. She was just so larger than life, and not the shadowy kind of characters that I'm usually drawn to. That her daughters are.
Daughters are.
Yes.
And her granddaughter's future husband, whose name, interestingly, is Jason, except when I first read it, I thought to myself, this is not the Greek Jason, this is the Jewish Jason.
That's so true. Right.
But all of these young people are so passive.
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
It's scary,
yes.
To think that these young people are so passive.
I think it was the sort of person that I was seeing around me, and there was a kind of, I was living in a place where I was seeing a lot of very passive young people. The force was coming from the older people who had to, they were so forceful that they decided not only how they were going to live, but how the generations to come after them were going to live. These immigrant people were extremely forceful, and then I didn't see that same. But is Phoebe so? Phoebe, she chooses her life, and she makes some very improbable choices that go against, her certainly against her grandmother. And I think that they're not forceful for different reasons. I think Chloe is, she feels too much. Chloe's depths are very, very deep, and she just didn't want to risk it. She was going to, she says, I want to study the passions. I don't want to live them. And that's a conscious choice. And I think for people who feel very deeply, that's often a choice to make, a sensible thing to do. Phoebe, really, she makes a very unusual choice. She goes back. She becomes a returnee. She's returns to the way of her great grandmother, and not of her grandmother. Her grandmother doesn't really approve of it, but of her great grandmother, and that's in her own very quiet way. I think heroic and forceful and independent, autonomous. She did it on her own. She chose her life. It's not the life of her mother, and nor is her mother's life the life of they're. I think in their own quiet way they weren't.
It's interesting because
Yes.
I think I must have misread your intention. I'm wondering how people in the audience, when you read these characters, what did you think was happening, sir?
Well, actually, I thought we had 4 generations of very liberating people. If you think about it, the great grandmother, if you will,
Liba.
and her husband.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievably, in some
not-
senses,
yeah.
really allows Sasha to be Sasha,
Right.
which is really quite remarkable.
Right.
And Sasha, for all her power, allows Chloe to be Chloe. And Chloe, for all her unusual background and her, you could say, unawareness of lack of understanding, as you put it, because they weren't speaking the same language of what Phoebe was, in a sense, liberates Phoebe to make her decisions. In fact, I think you have 4 generations of remarkable people, all of whom are enabling, and not what you would think of like Harriet. So I disagree totally. I think Sasha is a very enabling woman, despite her power.
Yeah.
Wait, now, were you seeing it that way?
Well, yes, actually,
Even
yeah.
Maurice, in his own way.
Even Maurice, yes, yeah. No, I really was. I really did. This is my crazy version of what good mother-daughter relations should be. That even if we really, in this most intimate of relationships, really, it's a very hard thing to understand another human being, even if you gave birth to them. Once they're not part of your body anymore, they're opaque and inscrutable, and the older they get, the more opaque and inscrutable, and one has to somehow make one's peace with that. Beatrice doesn't. Beatrice is my idea of a bad mother. She doesn't make her peace with that, and she's micromanaging it all. And to me, all 4, and I'm glad you reminded me of Liba. I discovered Fredel along the way. I didn't know about her in the beginning, but I had, since this was my experiment with trying to think out what good mother-daughter relationships would be, I didn't want there to be rebellion ever. And I wanted Sasha, I knew the kind of background Sasha had come from. I wanted her to go out into that world, but not the way most of us who have been brought up that way had to go out into the world, by rebellion. I didn't want there to be any rebellion or defiance. I wanted her parents to let her go. And I knew that would have to be extremely remarkable given where they were. So I knew that something very, very dramatic would have to take place, some very painful learning experience that would get these shtetl parents to think in non-shtetl terms, and and that's how I sort of discovered Fredel, that there would be this character Fredel. But yeah, through that just devastating experience that the parents do, without understanding it at all, let Sasha make this choice, and
But after they've lost Fredel.
yeah, and it was, I think, after they lost, there were not I think the concepts just didn't exist before. I mean, that's what it is to grow up in insularity, and this was a really insular world. The concepts just didn't exist to think it out. And Liba every once in a while would have sort of flashes of it, and she's angry when her husband says, you know, Fredel is like an ostrich, I think, you know, that she's like a bird born with wings, you know, but who can't fly because she's a woman. She's this oddity, this woman who basically is living for ideas. She's Phoebe, only born a little in the wrong place in the wrong time. She's exactly what Phoebe is. But she can't go to Princeton, and she can't do math. And the marriage contract is drawn up with a totally unsuitable person. And, you know, and Liba has these flashes, but there's this way of thinking that falls into place. And,
Well, I just want to read this short portion in which you talk about her pain, the mother's pain. Flesh of her own flesh, Fredel was a stranger in the deepest sense of the word. Leba didn't know how to go about imagining what the world was like for her daughter, what it felt like for Fredel to be Fredel. Even her sons and husband, inhabiting the remote and lofty world of their high learning, were not strangers in so deep a sense as Fredel. Sometimes it seemed to Leba that there was a strength forged out of some unknown metal that was hammered into Fredel, a power to resist that bewildered even Fredel, but in the thought of which Leba took some comfort. At other times, Leba felt that it was just the opposite, and she berated her own callous heart, which had chosen solace over seeing. Fredel was so fragile, she was left without any protection at all. She was a soul without a skin. Everything assaulted her. The world was flaying her raw. You told a story of a woman who approached you and said that she knew Fredel.
yeah, that was...
Fredel, the Michigan Madel.
That's right.
Tell us what happened.
Did I write about it in the afterword? Or
I think you mentioned it in the
Yeah.
afterward. I read it somewhere.
Yeah, that was a more uncanny experience. I was speaking at a university, and a professor came over to me. She taught in the Jewish Studies program, and she came from the part of the world I was writing about from Galicia. And of course, you know, she told me that immediately, and I, of course, get very nervous because I'm afraid she's come over to correct me on the mistakes in my research. And but she was very generous, and she was using the book in a course. And then there were other people who were waiting around to talk to me, and you know, she was sort of hanging around on the outskirts. And I saw that she had something else to tell me. And when everybody else had left, she came over to me and she said, you know, by the way, I knew Fredel. She lived in my village, and she died, as you said. And, you know, people, when you're a novelist, people are always accusing you of writing about them and, you know, and using their people you've never thought of for more than 2 seconds, or sure that you're writing about them. But this, you know, I remembered, you know, there was how I made her up and how it came to me to solve this problem. I didn't know what she was, and then she said to me, when I first read this book, I thought, how can this American woman know this story of Fredel? Because I'm the only survivor of my village. I'm the only one who knows this story. So, and then she said, but you made it up, right? And yes, I did make it up, and it was a sort of, you know, again, it was kind of, well, I mean, this is one of the amazing things I think we all know, but one knows it very strongly when one writes fiction, that the imagination is a cognitive faculty. As much as learning math or physics is a cognitive faculty, the imagination is a very important way of learning about the world, and certainly about learning about each other. And that actually connects up with it. Leba she has no way to imagine her way into her daughter's life. There's no ingress. There's just no access to this. The concepts she would need are just too far into her. You know, and to a certain extent, that's true of all of us. And we develop our powers of imagination to try to understand each other. It's an important way of gaining access into one another. And sometimes, you know, you do it so strongly you discover that there were people who essentially lived the life that you made up. But I would wonder what would it be like for someone like me, to have born in a place where I can't devote my life to what I want to devote my life to ideas, to study. How would that have been for me? And sure enough, I'm sure there were many Fredels throughout the Pale of Settlement. So yeah, it was
Which
tricky.
must validate you as a
Yeah, but
novelist.
it's very sad to think that it was true. But yes, it was. There's just as in in your scientific theories, there's you get out predictions and you get corroboration or falsification in the life of the imagination too. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you get some kind of corroboration. That there are such lives.
So the girls play this wonderful game in which they each tell or begin to tell a story. And the story becomes seamless after a while. Fredel sets it in this mythical Jewish Chicago. And it's a story to which Fredel, because Fredel is Fredel, gives these very tragic overtones. Where does the story come from? First of all, it reminded me very much of, it kind of suggests stories by I.B. Singer and even the Dybbuk to some extent, in its dark folklore. So I was wondering where the story comes from.
I don't know where it came from.
Is this an act of the imagination?
Yeah, I guess
or where does experience and imagination where do they intersect?
Well, first of all, this I can answer easily, that my sisters and I used to play this game on long Shabbos afternoons, start a story and then say pull the chain and the next person would have to, and I would always go, forget what my sisters had to say and just go with the story and turn it into my own story, much to their annoyance. Unless the story was very good, then I could get away with it. Otherwise, they would be interrupting me.
As was hers.
And her story was very good. It was a kind of, it was very much a reflection of who she was, Fredel, and the doomed bride without any real choices, who thinks she's doing something. It's a happily ever after story that she's getting married, but it's death. It's death she's in love with. She's in some sense, a very un-Jewish character. She's in love with death. I think that's very un-Jewish. But of course, the story takes on these other overtones because it a little bit pretells, or it does pretell, the doom that's awaiting the Jews of Europe, who are in the midst of celebrating life and celebrating, so many of them, their escape from the shtetl and grasping all these new and wonderful forms of creativity, and little do they know that death is there. Death is the bottom, Right. So so it takes on that significance as well. Right. But I don't know where the story came from. It came from Fredel.
Gender. Somebody mentioned, I think, Sarah, you did mention Maurice. The story is not archly feminist, but critics have pointed out that men play a very, very small role in it. I mean, there are male characters. There's Sasha's father, Rav David. There's the director of the Bilbul Art Theater, Herschel Blau, I think is his name. There's Sasha's husband and the father of Chloe, who is Maurice. But each one seems to be dominated, very much dominated by a strong woman, whether it's Leba in the case of the mother, and Sasha, and the aunt, the aunt impresario, Aunt Frida, who's a wonderful character. So the male character's impact seems to be the greatest when they're absent, including, by the way, the man who fathered Phoebe, the logician, who never appears on the scene,
Yes.
and created this wonderful child.
Right. What's that about?
What's
Yes.
that about? And why? And why does Maurice, who fathers the child, fathers Chloe before the war, I guess, or at the very beginning of the war, in other words,
Right.
before they separate. So it would have been perfectly possible for you to abandon Maurice.
Right.
It's a terrible thing to say, but he didn't have to survive. Why does he
Right.
survive?
Well, let me think. I don't know, actually. But, part of it is, I think, to me, Sasha and Maurice are they're a great love story for me, a very romantic tale. And so, it's...
Was it acceptable that he's in and out of her life?
well, I think that's very romantic.
Is that better than...
I just think that's much more romantic. Maurice was to me, in his own way, also a figure somewhat like Frel, a tremendously tragic figure, not a survivor. Sasha and all of these women to me were somehow they dealt. They were survivors, and they made choices, and they changed their choices. They changed their choices in the face of bad Mazel, there was a flexibility to their view of what life could be, and for them, when things turned out differently, they changed. They radically changed, and Frel couldn't do that, and Maurice couldn't do that. Maurice was someone who was meant to be university professor. He was meant to, he was on a, and he couldn't, he lives a kind of half-life afterwards. He lives a kind of shadow life. He's not fully engaged in life. He can't be fully engaged in life. He wants to be in places where there aren't too many people. There's a sort of disgust for life afterwards, and that is, it's a deeply interrupted life because of what happened in Europe. He can't take up the thread. He can't remake what it's. So I saw him very much. I had there were people in my family who I knew as a young child who had come over from the war, from Hungary, and I had actually noticed a difference, or when I think back, I was so young then, but I think back, there was a kind of, the women still seemed to have a lot more spunk to them. The men always, there was something very shadowy about them. They were asked to live a completely different life than what they had been brought up to live, brought up with tremendous wealth, tremendous entitlement. And there was a sort of shadowiness to them, and I think that's probably what was feeding into my view of Maurice. And so I wanted, in some ways, this is a Holocaust book. It doesn't deal directly with it, of course, but it's it is very much about life after. Any Jewish novel now is always about life after. We're always, in some way, referring to that unspeakable event. So, yeah, I think that's Maurice. To me, and every time Maurice was on the scene, he was very, very sad. I was always very sad. And Sasha understands him so well because she understands sadness very well. She understands Frel very well. Fredel's voice is in her head. She knows Fredel's voice very well. She chooses otherwise, but she understands Maurice as well. But the other characters, why they were, I don't know. I understand. I know why I made that choice with Maurice. I don't know about the other characters.
Your novel depicts this fascinating cultural milieu of pre-war Warsaw. I find it fascinating. We're aware of the anti-Semitism, Maurice, for example, has trouble getting into university. His brother Yasha Kent has problems at the conservatory. He's a composer. But on the other hand, there's this very vibrant world that is centered around the Yiddish theater. And that's fascinating. All of Warsaw is enamored of the Jewish King Lear. And you give us actually quite a long taste of it. And Sasha prepares to audition Ophelia, so apparently a great love of Shakespeare. The theater seems to have kind of opened up the world for Jews. Although it's very interesting, again, to note that when Sasha has a great success as an actress, it's really owing to Frel, because what she does is she develops the role that Frel had created. And so the connection to Schlufchev, to the shtetl, is not broken. And it's pointed out by a critic who is wowed by the play. And he writes, it's a rather simple tale derived from the backward life of the shtetl, wrapped up in childish superstition and ignorance. What an irony that from such primitive materials should come the first genuinely authentic contribution the Jewish theater has yet made to world drama. So it almost seems as though, what you're commenting on is all of Jewish intellectual life of the period.
And beyond.
And beyond, and beyond.
Yeah, that there is, it's interesting, when I discovered, just trying to solve this little problem of the three languages, that Sasha was going to be a Yiddish actress. So then I started doing some research about it, and I hadn't known really very much about Yiddish stage or Yiddish culture, the Yiddishist movement at all. And I really got swept away by what I was reading. First of all, so many of I got very excited because I discovered I could read a little Yiddish, and so that was very exciting. But it seems so contemporary. This notion of how we can, what's Jewish identity, if it's no longer has any kind of theistic underpinnings. How do we define it? How do we justify it? How do we explicate it? What is it? And why should we care? And that has a very, I think, modern, contemporary ring to it, these questions. But these questions were being asked and pursued there between those two wars, in that little window of enormous creativity. It was a revelation to me how much was going on. I didn't make up that Jewish King Lear. There was a Jewish King Lear. I found the translation of Ophelia's speech. I didn't write that. They loved Shakespeare. They loved the stage, where you could try on so many different identities. And I think I said, what's more Jewish than that, than trying to try on so many different identities? So this tremendous experimentation that was going on, and trying to figure out, trying to break with the past, break with the shtetl ways, but being pulled back as well, that there was something, and it was a very, as I think it continues to be, a very creative tension. It doesn't really make sense. If you don't believe in it anymore, you should leave, right? Or something. But we don't. And that kind of irrational tension, I think, is very, very creative. It gives us all different ways of trying to solve it, and that's what they were doing. So yeah, it was very deliberate, and that the impetus from it comes from the old ways, from the shtetl, from what was repressive, from what killed her sister, from what she hated, from what gave her lifetime claustrophobia. But it's part of the memory. It's part of our collective memory, and there's an attachment to it, even while we're running away from it. And that's very creative. I think there's there's a creativity there, and that's why that's the first. Of course, I was also thinking of the Dybbuk, which was in fact the real first masterpiece of Yiddish theater.
So you are a philosopher by training, and I understand that you recently returned to teaching philosophy.
Yes.
You once said that your ambition, unlike Cynthia Ozik's, who wanted to dream Jewish dreams, she said, yours was to know and to not dream.
Did I say that? Aha, all right.
And yet, it appears that you find yourself dreaming, not only dreaming, but dreaming Jewish dreams more often than not.
Right.
What do you think?
What do I think? I think not only do I know that we have very little control over our lives, I in particular have very little control over my own mind. So I set out to live a completely rational life, and somehow became a novelist, which is not a rational thing for anybody to do, no matter how you define rationality. So no, it surprises me. I didn't set out to be a novelist. I always loved novels passionately, devoured novels, didn't completely approve of my passion for novels, thought of it as frivolous. Wasn't math, wasn't philosophy, wasn't even history. It's made up stories. It's make believe. But I love it. I love the life of the imagination, and there it was. I started doing it for some reason. But no, it's true. I still have trouble justifying it to myself, and I go back and forth on it.
The novel depicts the tension, we said, between the secular and the traditional in Schluftchev, and Friedel's rebellion in Lipton, and Sasha's rebellion, perhaps, in Warsaw on the eve of the Holocaust. And let's take a look at this. 268, 269. And I think you alluded to this earlier. This is a conversation between the composer, Yasha, and Herschel, the director. It's enough, Yasha answered him. He turned back to Herschel. Here you have told me a fairy tale. I'll tell you another. Imagine that there's a place on this earth, who knows, maybe it's America, where a person can really wipe the schmutz off his ancient sandals once and for all, and nobody will tell him he can't. He can throw the sandals out altogether with the morning garbage, put on the shoes his neighbors choose to wear, and live among them with no difference. And you accuse Herschel of telling fairy tales, Maurice said with a laugh. So, said Yasha, smiling at his brother, how do you foresee the end of my fairy tale? Oh, I know how you think it will end, said Maurice. There won't be anyone left who still wears sandals. Precisely. In a few generations, 3 or 4 at the most, nobody will even remember who was a sandal wearer and who wasn't. So, said Herschel, finally pushing back his chair and reaching for his hat, we will have to see whose is the more improbable fairy tale. They stepped out into the quiet street, setting off in the direction of Sasha's apartment. The trolley cars weren't operating at this hour. Once again, they would have to walk. They hadn't gone 3 blocks from the Café Pripyatchuk when they heard from down the darkened street the sound of rowdy voices speaking in Polish. University students, most probably. Without a word, the 4 of them melted into the darkness of the first courtyard that presented itself. They certainly preferred not to have to test Sasha's proven talent for projecting the air of a Polish aristocrat. They waited for the joyful voices of the students, about 4 or 5 in number, deep in their cups from the sound of them, to pass down the road and fade into the night before they ventured out once more beneath the street lamps and continued toward home. So here we have this hint of the Holocaust to come, and escape in America, but not escape, not just physical escape, but escape from Jewishness.
Right.
And so, I'm just wondering what shall I say, your personal movement in some way, if it's representative, you think, of American Jews in general?
Well, first, actually, the anti-Semitism that they're so trained to guard against, if there are drunken university students on the streets, to melt into the shadows. I actually didn't think of as a harbinger of what's to come, but just as a condition of life. It was such a daily condition of life in Poland to know that you keep out of the way of students, university students who have drunken too much. Anti-Semitism was at that point very much on the rise. It had become even, but it was always there. It was a sort of a standing condition of life. This question, I think actually in that conversation, I'm probably being more explicit than I usually am on what kind of really showing what I'm wondering about, one of the things I'm wondering about in this novel. But, to me it's very mysterious that here here's a people who suffer for being, as these people are going to suffer in unbelievable ways, for being members of a hated group. And of course the rational thing to do is, if you could leave this group, you do, and why cling to something? And we feel this again so strongly, unfortunately. When I wrote it, it seemed very much a question of the past. It doesn't feel quite so much a question of the past anymore. But why this kind of elective affinity with a despised group of people? Why do it? And if there was such a place that would let us forget it, like America, wouldn't everybody do it? And yet, in fact, we look around us and we see, irrationally, no, we don't do it, or a large number of us don't do it. And that's a great mystery. That is a great mystery, and why we don't, and what's the pull, and what is it? What is this, if anything? It's more mysterious than ever.
Because there's more choice?
There's more choice. There's a great deal of choice.
Is that what we mean by the chosen people?
I think we're choosing. Yes, it is. I think so. We're choosing. That's, sometimes it's not our choice, but we're lucky enough to live in a place where it actually is our choice. Even to be a Jewish writer, it's, why do it? Why write in such a way that makes you identified as a Jewish writer? Again, there's no rational reason to do it. There are many rational reasons not to do it. And yet, more and more writers are doing it. The resurgence of Jewish letters in this country is extraordinary. The vitality in Jewish letters is nobody could have predicted this 10 years ago, 15 years ago. How many young, brilliant Jewish writers would appear on the scene? It's Mazel. It's extraordinary, right? There's no way. It's not Seykhl. It's Mazel. There's no way to explain it.
Well, that of course is what this form is all about.
Yes.
Literary exchange. I think I would like to. Well, first of all, are there any comments or questions? Anything that anybody wants to ask at this point? Yes, ma'am.
I discussed your book with my grown daughter. I'm very impressed with your book on
you.
many levels.
Thank you.
And she asked me when I finished to answer the question, did you mean by Mazel that which occurs without any control or input? Or did you mean by Mazel knowing when to take advantage of the situation and making it?
Yeah, both. Yeah. I actually, the first is what, sort of metaphysically, that's Mazel, right? That's, there's no way to predict it. There's no way to control it. It's the external forces, fate, or fate even sounds like some sort of control, but just contingency is what we call it in philosophy. The brute contingency, and just the given, and no matter how smart you are, things are given. That you can't control. Maybe, it's a good question your daughter's asking. Maybe what I would describe as real Seykhl is the second thing she meant by Mazel, right? And that's something that all those women had. They had Seykhl. That is, given what the gods hand out, what do you do with it? Can you rethink your life all over again? That's a kind of Seykhl. That's a realistic Seykhl, taking into account the fact that we're subject to Mazel, to contingency. But yeah, I like your daughter's question.
Other comments, questions? Yes?
I've been wondering about Phoebe's statement at the end, when she embraces her Judaism more, when she says, even the dead need the comfort of their own kind. And I was wondering if, in a sense, she wanted to align herself with those that have gone before, it was comforting them, or if in a way Jewishness was a comfort to a part of herself that felt dead, and in a way, to me, her being holed up in her study is a death.
Yeah, that to me, first of all, I have to say that story that she liked so much is part of my family's legacy. That was a story that was told about my great-great-grandfather, that a dead man, my great-great-grandfather was a very learned rabbi, that a dead man had come to him in the dead of night and asked to be buried. And so this was one of those stories I had heard as a child that had haunted me. But Phoebe, what she says of her own kind, she means it very literally. She's a very literal type of person, and she really does mean, these returnees, this Orthodox world that she was re-embracing. But Phoebe did need, she needed the comfort of her own kind. She's finding it there. That's her particular solution to the problem of being Phoebe. Phoebe was, there was a previous story that these characters all came from. When I came up with this brilliant idea of these soap bubbles that were somehow going to show me how to deal with my rebellious 13-year-old, I wrote a story first because I never want to start another novel. And if I have an idea, I always think, well, I can work it out in a short story. I don't want to have to devote, the next few years of my life to yet another one of these novels. So I wrote a story called The Geometry of Soap Bubbles, An Impossible Love, in which I sort of, adumbrate these three characters. They're really just sketched. And then I liked these three characters so much that I wrote another story called Strange Attractors that became the title story of a collection, Strange Attractors. And there Phoebe is, she's a child woman, as many mathematicians are there's a childlike quality to them. There's this great Russian mathematician who theorizes that you can tell what age, I'm talking about great real strong mathematical talent, you can tell what age it occurred in somebody by looking at their emotional age. And these great mathematicians, because all emotional development stops when these prodigies become prodigies. So that there are mathematicians who are 12, who are 7. I knew one who was 4. It was clearly that's when it happened. So Phoebe is, she's a child woman, and she can't quite live in this world. And then, she needs this very kind of protected, insular world, and she finds her own kind there. It happens to be a Jewish world, and she certainly interprets it as, that's her own kind. I don't know if I do, but it was the kind of world in which Phoebe can be Phoebe and be Phoebe and pursue the kind of ideas that feed her, that would have fed Frel, but yet not be asked to participate wholly in the rough and tough of this world, which would have bruised her incredibly. So she's a brilliant mathematician, actually, and she came up with a brilliant solution to the problem of being Phoebe, become an Orthodox Jew. And so I don't know, that's a long, rambling way of avoiding your question, which I never really dealt with because I don't know how to. Sir.
You had something, I was wondering whether it was related to your being a philosopher yourself. The vehemence of Sasha when she hears Marie saying everything's connected.
Yes. Yes.
A powerful response.
Yes.
And since obviously that, at least to me, I thought it related to your own profession and what you were writing about. Could you expound upon that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, it is, and I was thinking particularly, of course, of a philosopher like Spinoza, who says there is no contingency in the world. The world is thoroughly rational. If you're smart enough, you can figure it out. Nothing's going to take you too much by surprise. And the things that you can't figure out, the things that you can't control, you shouldn't care about. And he says that. I mean, that's the fourth book of the Ethics, I happen right now to be teaching, is called Of Human Bondage. And it's about the life of the passion. And one other novelist has already used it as a title for a novel. Otherwise, I would have grabbed it. It's such a wonderful Somerset Maugham, of course. But it is that, everything, yes, the world is thoroughly rational. If our minds were infinite, if they were coextensive with the infinite intellect of God, we would see it all. We could deduce everything. We can't. But the thing that we should care about are the things that we, is being able to see. The one thing that we really can control, the progress of our own understanding. And Sasha, she understands this very well, and she understands because she knows, she's lost. She's loved and she's lost deeply. That's what shaped her. And she knows how courageous it is to continue loving, since we can control. I mean, it's hard enough to control one's own life. To love other people is to spread one's vulnerability beyond one's skin, to spread it abroad. When the rational thing, as Spinoza says, is to make ourselves as little vulnerable as possible. Don't care about things you can't control. And, Sasha understands the pull of that very, very well. And the reason she so rejects it is, her whole life is based on defying that's, she says to that, bullshit. That's what she says to that. So, and that's the real philosophical argument between Seykhl and Mazel. That's what that little folk tale is really trying to, or what I was trying to get across with that. A deep, deep philosophical dilemma. Should we make ourselves vulnerable to contingency, or should we try to guard ourselves as much as possible? And that's Sasha's whole character is formed out of saying, the hell with safety. You're going to miss out on life. You're going to miss out. If all was logic, where would be the drama? So.
Well, I think that's an excellent conclusion. If there are no other comments or questions, and I think that you've said it all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you all for coming. And is Ariel here? When do we see these good people next, we hope? November 20th for Joseph Berger. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.